Hello everybody, Brian Kelson back again, the day after the video yesterday, Paul in Acts number 2, and it had been a while since I'd done a video. Yesterday wasn't my best effort. Hey, I was on holidays, it was Christmas, I put on a couple of pounds, my brain was fat, and I'm not sure I made the points clearly enough. I want to refresh today. We know that in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul speaks about espousing the Corinthians as a chaste virgin to one husband. 2 Corinthians 11, you know the passage. However, my point yesterday, by looking at other passages from the Old Testament, which also showed this divine figurative relationship between Jehovah and the nation of Israel as one of husband, wife, bridegroom, bride, betrothal, espousal. So what I was trying to say was this: just because Paul mentions that he's espoused the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 11 doesn't mean that in other parts of Paul's writings during the Acts period ignored that same figurative relationship. You see, we can't inject Christ as the head of the church, which is his body, into 2 Corinthians 11. But we can't bring back across the Acts period, Acts 28 boundary either, the fact that Christ has raised and seated at Father's right as the head of the church, which is his body, the fullness of him that filleth all, back into Romans either. Because Romans has, based upon Old Testament passages, Isaiah, the Psalms, which speak of, not all of them, but the prophecies speak of this relationship of husband and wife. And even though Paul doesn't spell it out, the prophecies that he uses, which are the foundations of his writings during the Acts period, the prophecies speak of that same relationship. That we can't ignore the fact that Romans has Isaiah as a great theme running through it, and then try and say that parts of Romans are about the body saints and other parts of Romans are about the kingdom saints. No, Romans is built on prophecy and promise, where that figurative relationship exists. Now, I left the scriptures with you in yesterday's video. Enjoy the search. I will not convince you of anything. This is not my job to convict you of anything. My job is to put things in front of you and say, search and see. And yes, it's hard work. And if I may take a verse of scripture out of context from Romans 10, faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word. Let me tell you, going to church and singing wonderful hour-long choruses that build up our emotions is a way to worship the Lord. Not saying it's wrong, but I'm telling you, it's not a faith-building process. It's positive, but it's not faith-building, unless it's truly based upon the rightly divided word of truth. We can't go to Galatians and talk about Paul's gospel given by the ascended Christ and ignore the dispensational fact that the Gentiles were blessed with Abraham, that the Gentiles were like Isaac. That's the Gentile believers and the Jewish believers that he was writing to were in fact like Isaac, children of promise, that they were sons of Abraham, that they had an inheritance, and that the law was a schoolmaster to bring them to Christ, who was the mediator of a better covenant, and who had prepared the new Jerusalem, or the heavenly city, or the Jerusalem which is above in Galatians 4, as that inheritance. On my website and the charts menu, you will find a chart showing before Acts 28 that Peter, Paul, and Hebrews, and I picked those 3 key passages of the New Testament to show the harmony of the Old Testament usage. Oh yes, Paul received his gospel by Christ in the Acts period, the ascended Christ in the Acts period. But the ascended Christ in the Acts period was the high priest king of Israel ready to return at trumpets. That's the dispensational setting under which Paul wrote all the way to Acts 28. Supernatural gifts, the imminent return, the ministry of the new covenant, writing about the heavenly city, quoting Old Testament passages that speak of that figurative relationship, husband and wife. That's what I was trying to say yesterday. The other point, when we got to the book of Revelation, because the book of Revelation is linked to Galatians through that heavenly city. And what I tried to point out was in those 7 churches which were in Asia, i.e. 100 miles north of where the Apostle Paul was born, that those letters were written by the ascended Christ. He spoke to those churches through John, the one who was coming in the clouds in the book of Revelation, the one whose voice sounded like a trumpet. We have Zion. We have the New Jerusalem later in the book of Revelation. We have the Euphrates. We have the rivers. We have the tree of life, all going back to Eden, which is an indirect link to Adam found in Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15. We can't ignore the fact that Paul, in his Acts period gospel by revelation, is linked to Hebrews, is linked to the book of Revelation, is linked to the prophecy and promise of the Old Testament writers. This is where mid-Acts fails. They see justification by faith through grace given to Paul by revelation and think that's the beginning of something new. It was in Abraham and it was in David. Stop the nonsense. Romans through Philemon is a disaster. Now, I went to the 7 churches at the beginning of the book of Revelation, and I wanted to show when we compare spiritual with spiritual and look, we find that the primary minister to these churches in Asia was Paul. Acts 16, Acts 19. Paul was 2 years in Ephesus, and in Ephesus he was less than 200 miles from all the other churches that the book of Revelation addresses. So Paul ministered to the churches that the book of Revelation is addressing. Oh wait, someone said that the book of Revelation was 100 years after the Acts period. Oh, that's really fascinating. So now we've got the Lord a bit late. But wait, there's something more incredibly dispensationally important here. Are you trying to tell me that 100 years after the close of the Acts period, that would be many years after Ephesians and Colossians were written, are you telling me that the ascended Christ is now going to go back to the earthly purpose and write a book and say, I'm coming shortly, when he's put Israel aside at Acts 28 and revealed the mystery to the Apostle Paul, which is a heavenly calling, which has nothing to do with trumpets, nothing to do with clouds, nothing to do with the 12 tribes, which of course is the foundation of the city, which we didn't get to look at. Not the 12 tribes, the 12 apostles. Do you think Christ would have written the book of Revelation after he had revealed to Paul the truth of the mystery in the present administration? Not happening. That's my opinion. I want you to think about that too. The book of Revelation fits. Now, in 2 Corinthians 12, we have the Apostle Paul talking about someone who had a vision. And you can argue all you like as to who that vision was. Was it John or was it Paul? It doesn't matter. You know what is so critical about 2 Corinthians 12, let me find it, is that it was 14 years before Paul wrote 2 Corinthians. Let me think. 14 years before he wrote 2 Corinthians, and it's all about paradise, which is only mentioned in, I think it's Luke, and is only mentioned in the book of Revelation and by Paul in 2 Corinthians 12. 14 years before he wrote it was a vision about paradise and the third heaven. Oh, the new heavens and the new earth of Isaiah. The new heavens and the new earth of Peter, 2 Peter 3. The new heavens and the new earth. It's not the present dispensation of the grace of God. So you have in 2 Corinthians 11 espoused virgin to one husband, and you have the new heavens and the new earth and paradise in the very next chapter. All Old Testament. Now, 100 years after this, or however many years, suddenly the Lord remembers that he forgot to mention about all the details of what was going to happen prior to his return at trumpets, and write it to John on the Isle of Patmos after he's revealed to Paul the present truth? Now, here's the other problem. It was Paul that ministered to those Asian churches, and now Paul writes to Timothy and says, all in Asia be turned away from me. All in Asia have turned away from Paul. And the present administration, therefore, didn't fall on deaf ears. There were no ears to hear it. And to that group which deserted Paul, Christ said, oh, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you the book of Revelation so that you can stay back in something that I have put aside. You see what Romans and Philemon does? Romans through Philemon does? It screws the New Testament dispensationally. Now, if you're a right divider and you attend a Grace Bible Church and you believe Romans through Philemon, I challenge you, it's time to really look at this, because it's creating more questions than answers in your life. So, the Asian churches that are featured in the book of Revelation were part of Paul's ministry in the Acts period. 2 Corinthians 12 says, 14 years ago, there was a vision about the things, some of the features, that the book of Revelation talks about. Do you really think it was written 100 years after that? Or 80 years after that? Don't think so. So I don't care whether it was Paul who had the same revelations about the same features of the book of Revelation, or he's referring to John in the book of Revelation. It doesn't matter. It's the same dispensational truth, isn't it? That's some of the points I was trying to make in yesterday's video, so I'm going to post this up and say, hey, watch this, so it'll help explain my foggy thinking yesterday. I got fat over Christmas, I got fat in the brain, I stumbled, made wrong references, you know what I'm like, but I'm not here to start a movement. There's no room on this property down here in central Florida. We don't have churches here. And what happened to the churches when Paul wrote to Timothy? What happened to the assemblies? The fact of the matter is, it's one-on-one. You learn, you share with somebody else. The head, joints and bands, nourishment being ministered. And I pray that my little effort here is nourishment in the fact that it inspires you. Open your Bible, have a look, and I know you will find, as many ex-mid-acts brethren are finding, Romans through Philemon doesn't work. It's a mistake. People saw right division, ran with the Apostle Paul because he got his ministry by revelation. But his ministry by revelation in the Acts period was predominantly prophecy. And I think the only thing that he brought out, and I think this is the mystery of Romans 16, the only one that brings out the relationship between Adam and Christ is the Apostle Paul. And that's in the Acts period when Adam was given dominion in a garden and Christ was going to return at trumpets to Zion and change the nation of Israel into a garden, according to that prophecy. By now, I hope you remember, right? Isaiah 51, I'm sure you do. Well, the Lord bless you as you continue to search and see, and I hope this clarified what I was trying to say yesterday. Now, next video, this will be 2A or something like that, but number 3 on this series, we're going to go into Revelation 21, and we're going to take it all the way back into the Acts period. We're going to look at the similarities and the harmonies of Revelation and Paul in Acts, because I'll tell you one thing, the book of Revelation, the book of Hebrews, which we will also be looking at, and Paul in the Acts, dispensationally, have nothing to do with Paul dispensationally in Ephesians and Colossians. Search and see, my brethren. The Lord bless you all.